What's up, guys? I am back on YouTube after a long hiatus, and we're going to be ranking every position group in the 2025 draft class, starting with quarterbacks. I've got 17 quarterbacks graded, and we can just go ahead and get right into it. For every player, I'm going to have a few graphics. I've got a scouting report with their strengths and weaknesses. We've got their size and athletic testing, and then I've got player ratings for each individual skill for every position. Every graphic that I use on this video, you can find on my draft board, which I have as like a web application. I'll put the link to that in the description. And I think what I'm going to do for each of these ranking videos is start out with the first player that I'm talking about, just going through what I mean for all of the individual ratings. This is also a good way to lead off by talking about, the skills and traits that are most important for each position. I've got these ratings scaled so that 50 is adequate for an NFL draft prospect. We've got short accuracy, which is anything behind the line of scrimmage to within about 5 yards. Intermediate is kind of 8 to 15 yards. Deep is 20 plus. Middle is accuracy between the numbers. Sideline accuracy outside the numbers. Off platform includes designed rollouts, but also play extension or even throws from within the pocket where you're throwing off an unbalanced base. And then footwork is just footwork and mechanics, basically like your passing technique. For arm talent, arm strength is just how far you can throw the ball. Velocity is how much zip you can put on it. Release is specifically how quick and efficient your throwing process is. Flexibility is your ability to release the ball from different platforms, different arm slots. Can you make like sidearm adjustments when you aren't squared up to your target, that kind of thing. And then touch is just your ability to elevate the trajectory of the ball, drop it in the bucket, basically. That includes hole shots to the sideline, but also layering throws over the middle of the field. For mental, I've got decision-making, processing, and anticipation. I think next year I'm going to expand this to include a few more specific ratings, but decision-making essentially includes like protecting the football, not turning it over through the air. Processing is your ability to get through reads efficiently, work within structure. Anticipation is a quarterback's ability to recognize throwing windows before they actually emerge and are clearly apparent. And it also factors in like comebacks and deep outs. Are you releasing the ball before the receiver breaks? For mobility, we've got rushing, which is just a quarterback's ability as a runner. That's on designed runs and as a scrambler. Break sack is the elusiveness and strength to break out of sacks. Pocket presence is a quarterback's feel for pressure, their ability to step up and navigate the pocket to find clean release platforms. It also factors in, how many bad sacks are you taking because of unnecessary drifting and stuff like that. And then play extension is how effective are you when the play breaks down and you're out of the pocket. So I have Jameson Wong as my lowest graded quarterback. He's just over 6 foot, 210 pounds, so definitely undersized by NFL standards. I think the best aspect of his game is his mobility. He was a dual threat, at least at the Ivy League level. He also has a really good sense for pressure. He quickly identifies free runners. He's got the elusiveness to shake pass rushers in the backfield. And in 2024, he had a pressure to sack rate of just 8.8%. He's never had one above 14% in his career. Outside of that, though, he doesn't really have many redeeming qualities as an NFL quarterback. I mean, this is a guy that I would barely even really consider giving like a training camp invite. I just don't see a route to him making an NFL roster. He has a very weak arm, struggles to put velocity on the ball. Cornell didn't really have an advanced pro style passing game, and I thought that his vision and decision making was pretty inconsistent even at that level. And then his accuracy I thought was also a major concern. At quarterback 16, I've got Matthew Downing out of Elon, and he's the only quarterback on this list that I didn't write a scouting report for. I just didn't feel like it was worth it because I don't see him getting drafted. For Downing, the one thing that he brings to the table is I thought he had pretty good deep accuracy. He actually had like a handful of really nice throws on tape. The William and Mary game from 2024 I thought was really impressive, but despite that, he doesn't have a great arm. He isn't very accurate to other levels of the field. The offense that he ran was basically just deep shots. There was nothing that translatable in terms of intermediate processing. And then he has the worst sack avoidance in this class. He had a 31% pressure to sack rate, which is, I'm pretty sure, the highest in this class, and he's playing in the FCS. Part of that's because he's not very mobile, but it's also like every play, he's just got his eyes locked deep down the field, and he's not even really looking for pressure. Next up, we've got Seth Hennigan out of Memphis at quarterback 15. Now we're getting into guys that are worth taking a look at in the preseason, basically. Hennigan has decent size, I think probably slightly below average arm talent. He just isn't very accurate. His mechanics are inconsistent. He's willing to challenge windows over the middle of the field, but I don't think his field vision and coverage ID is that great. Not somebody that's going to read the entire field, get off of his first read very often. I thought he had a good balance of being aggressive without being reckless. There were a couple ill-advised throws into double coverage, but I thought overall his decision making was pretty sound, but he was still chasing big plays. Ultimately, though, I think the physical traits are nothing special, and the accuracy or lack thereof is going to hold him back from being an effective pocket passer. At quarterback 14, my last priority free agent grade, I've got Graham Mertz out of Florida, about 6'3.5", 212 pounds, so good size for the position. Mertz only played 5 games in 2024, so I watched those 5 games, but then I also watched some cut-ups from 2023. I watched, I think all of his throws 15 plus yards down the field. I watched all of his sacks, all of his interceptions, some stuff like that. So I got a pretty good feel for what he is as a prospect, but you would like to see more recent tape ideally. He is a very conservative and turnover-averse pocket passer. In 2023, he had a turnover-worthy play rate of just 1.4%, which is one of the lowest in this class, only threw 3 interceptions. He does a great job protecting the football, although I think that play style is actually kind of a detriment to his ability to generate explosive plays. His average depth of target in 2023 was 6.7 yards, one of the lowest in college football, and that isn't because it was an overly screen-heavy offense, and that's just dragging down his average. He is very, very eager to a fault to progress to his check down. He leaves a lot of yardage on the field just by passing up open receivers. As a processor, I think he's pretty solid on half field concepts. He just isn't great at progressing to the other side of the field and scanning from sideline to sideline. In 2023 specifically, he really struggled with sack evasion. I thought there was pretty noticeable improvement in that in 2024, but again, just 5 games. And then he was pretty effective on deep throws from the 20 to 25 yard range, but after 30 yards, really lost control of ball placement, overthrew Ricky Pearsall and some of the other Florida receivers pretty frequently. All right, we are now on to the draftable grades, and that's going to start with Riley Leonard coming in at quarterback 13, barely draftable. So I came into Riley Leonard's tape with moderate expectations, I guess, but there's not a whole lot here with him as a prospect. I would say there are exactly 3 things that he brings to the table. He's a dual threat quarterback, 929 rushing yards, 16 touchdowns last year. Very good athlete, but also a powerful runner. He can be a weapon in the low red zone. He throws a beautiful slot fade. That is a very good throw for him. And then he also has textbook pocket movement. He's one of the best pocket climbers in this class. He's got an 11.7% career pressure to sack rate, extremely low for a draft prospect. His ability to sense that edge pressure, make an explosive climb up the pocket with his eyes downfield, step into a throw is excellent. Outside of that, though, there is really nothing to hang your hat on. I mean, he plays the position like he's been getting quarterback training for his entire life, but every practice, all they do is pocket movement into throwing slot fades. Purely from a volume standpoint, there just aren't a lot of throws on his tape. He's eclipsed 300 passing yards just 3 times in 36 career starts, hasn't done it since 2022. A lot of these guys, you watch their tape and there might be, 12 to 15 throws in a single game that you can make some evaluation off of. You watch Riley Leonard, it's 25, 30 handoffs, a bunch of quarterback runs, some screens, and then, 2 or 3, maybe 4 actual downfield throws. He's an extremely conservative game manager. I wrote in his report that he plays quarterback like someone just yelled at him. A stat that I found was only 46% of his 3rd or 4th down attempts were past the sticks, which was 3rd lowest in the Power 4. With these kind of stats, I don't just go cherry picking for, stats that make somebody look good or bad. It's I watch their tape, I notice that he's never pushing the ball down the field and gotta have it situation, so I go look up that stat. He isn't a very quick processor. He locks onto a first read, predetermines where he's going with the ball before the snap. If he's gonna throw to his second read, he'll hang on it for 2 or 3 seconds and make absolute sure that it's wide open. And that pretty much defeats the purpose of progressing to your second read because it gives the defense time to close in on that passing lane. I heard from talking to some people that are pretty plugged in with that situation. I know that Notre Dame kind of had to simplify their offense for Riley Leonard, and like watching his tape, that checks out. I think his decision making as far as protecting the football was also a pretty big weakness. Part of that comes to his inefficient processing and staring down targets, steering defenders into passing windows. He'll also miss late zone droppers, like if they're in a double mug look and they're dropping people off the line of scrimmage, he'll be kind of oblivious to them and throw an easy interception. And then his accuracy is terrible. I mean, he's the least accurate quarterback in this class behind the next guy that we're going to talk about. Again, outside of the slot fade, he doesn't have a throw in his bag that he can hit consistently. And his arm talent, I would say, is NFL caliber, especially pushing the ball down the field. Like, I don't worry about him throwing the ball far. He really struggles to generate velocity, especially when he's on the move and he can't fully integrate his hips into the throw. But yeah, the lack of zip was a pretty big concern. When he's throwing field side, opposite hash, deep outs, the ball sinks, dips, skips to his target pretty often. At quarterback 12, I've got Brady Cook out of Missouri, and I'm going to show film for all of these players, but SEC film, I think, just gets shut down by like whoever owns it. So not going to have film for some of these guys. Brady Cook, I really liked his tape. I was pleasantly surprised watching his film. I think he's got some limitations as a prospect, but I do really like him as a college quarterback, at least. He had a great combine performance. There were only 3 quarterbacks, I think, that did any of the drills, but he was clearly the best. His 10-yard split, 99.5 percentile, broad jump, basically the best ever for a quarterback. Vertical jump, 95th percentile. If it doesn't work out at quarterback, I mean, let's see if he can play X receiver. And that athleticism shows up on tape. Definitely checks out. They'll use him a lot in the read option game, QB power. He's also very athletic when it comes to avoiding pressure. He's got the reactive athleticism where like he's got immediate pressure up the middle. He can just dodge somebody in a phone booth and break out of the pocket. I think outside of Jalen Milroe, Brady Cook is probably the best pure athlete in this quarterback class. He also has a really good arm, not just adequate, I would say like an above average NFL arm. He throws with good velocity to the sideline, but he can also push the ball 55 yards down the field. He had some incredible throws. The Texas A&M game is one of the best quarterback performances from this class. And it's funny because they got blown out in that game. I think he only had, 186 yards, 1 touchdown, 42% completion rate. He made some just insane throws, like on the move, diving out to the sideline, launches the ball 50 yards down the field, perfect ball placement, and his receivers just couldn't catch it. And I really thought across his entire tape, when it comes to just making big throws down the field, Brady Cook was really impressive in that regard. He also has that ideal blend of being an aggressive gunslinger, pushing the ball downfield, but protecting the football as well. Kind of like what I said with Seth Hennigan, but I think to a much larger degree. He only threw 2 interceptions last year, only had 2 turnover-worthy throws. He had 4 turnover-worthy plays, but 2 of them were fumbles. When it comes to the mental aspect of the game, I think that's a slight concern for me. He wasn't asked to make a lot of full field reads. He at least threw over the middle of the field pretty frequently relative to other college quarterbacks, but a lot of times it was like he throws a 13-yard dig route, but he's staring down his receiver from the release to the time he gets the ball. He doesn't consistently move off of his primary target, and I think throwing with more anticipation is also going to be something that he has to improve in the NFL. The real just like non-negotiable thing that Brady Cook struggles with, though, is accuracy. He's the least accurate quarterback in this class, especially within 20 yards. Short to intermediate accuracy was absolutely atrocious. If he improves his ball placement, I genuinely could see him becoming like a scrappy kind of spot starter fringe backup type, like the 32nd to 35th best quarterback in the league. But as he is now, I mean, he's just kind of unplayable in the NFL. My 11th ranked quarterback is Curtis Rourke out of Indiana. Big, tough pocket passer, over 6'4", 220. He played the entire 2024 season on a torn ACL, which obviously speaks to his toughness. My thing with Curtis Rourke, and I really like him personally because I'm an Indiana fan, he led us to, the best college football season in program history. So shout out to him for that. I was hoping that I liked his tape more, but I think that he's kind of this game manager, like dice him up pocket passer style of player. He just lacks precision in a lot of areas that you would really need to succeed with that play style in the NFL. So the first thing I got to mention when it comes to Indiana's passing offense, it is one of the least diverse passing games in all of college football. There are pretty much two concepts that make up, rough estimate, 35% of all of their passing calls. They're either going to throw a slot fade or an RPO slant. 14.4% of his completions last year were slants, which was the highest in Power 4. When you watch Curtis Rourke's tape, there's a lot of stuff that you just kind of got to filter through, because it's like, I've seen him do that 30 times already in this tape session. He's generally pretty accurate. I would say above average ball placement, although that's something that regressed later in the year. Beginning of the year, he was an absolute machine. Like, you watch the UCLA game, pretty much a perfect quarterback performance. But against the two best teams that Indiana played, Notre Dame and Ohio State, he had his worst performances, especially when it comes to ball placement. He's an okay processor, especially within what Indiana asked him to do, but not really an anticipatory thrower. And then his decision making was really disappointing. He's got a 3.1% career turnover worthy play rate. There's a lot of just misreading the safeties, lofting throws into double coverage, doesn't recognize coverage rotations, doesn't have a great feel for spacing and zone coverage, like where and when he needs to throw something to avoid an adjacent hook defender or something. So there's a lot of things about Curtis Rourke for a precise pocket passer archetype of quarterback that are just really disappointing. Like, you can't be that style of player and turn the ball over a lot, not have pinpoint accuracy, not be this great processor, because he doesn't really add in the other aspects of his game. Like, despite his size, his arm strength is very average. He's completely immobile, not a dual threat at all, unable to evade pressure, especially in 2024, which is more understandable because he was playing on a torn ACL. But I went back and just watched like how he was moving in previous years, and like, he's not a great athlete. I think Curtis Rourke is one of those players that you're taking not for the upside, but just like, we're going to get a backup quarterback on a cheap rookie contract. My quarterback 10 is going to be Quinn Ewers out of Texas. This is a player where I've just never really seen it. Like, he comes in as the number one overall player in his class, had a perfect rating on 24/7 Sports. I watch every single play of Texas's offense every year because they've always got draft prospects. So I've been watching him his whole career, and I was always, expecting to see some kind of high-end trait or upside with Quinn Ewers, and I've just never seen it. More so than any player I've ever watched, the recruiting pedigree is just baffling to me. Like I said, I've been watching this dude for years, and there's been like 3 games where he's really popped, and I've actually seen it. The Alabama game in 2023 was really good. The Michigan game this year, I watched that tape like a couple days after the game, and I remember thinking to myself, oh, okay, this is what people are seeing with Quinn Ewers. And from that point, I was, locked in, like I'm open to him being a draft prospect. And then I watch him the next few games, and it's like, no, this is the Quinn Ewers I've been watching for years. And then the third game I would say is the SEC championship game against Georgia. I thought that was excellent. But to kind of balance that out, the Georgia game in the regular season, I think week 7, one of the worst quarterback performances from this class. He had 7 turnover-worthy throws. He was inaccurate. I mean, just like, that looks like he should be down there with Jamison Wong if you just watch that tape. So looking at his traits, he's undersized. He is just over 6'2", which it seems like every quarterback in this class is just over 6'2". I think arm strength, I would say, is adequate, but absolutely no ability to throw with zip. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen him drive a pass into a tight window. Every single throw, the only throw that he's capable of is a floater. He's a bad athlete, no threat as a runner, struggles to escape pressure. He's not particularly accurate, not a very sharp processor. Texas's passing game, I really like the way it's designed from a college football standpoint, but it's not overly complex as far as what they're asking him to do. He has to just pretty much play point guard. Like everything is kind of defined for him and built to allow him to operate on autopilot. Even within that scheme, he was still late to see open receivers, or times that he didn't even see them at all and took a bad sack or forced a check down, threw it away. He's a player that gets tunnel vision on his first read, doesn't see backside digs coming open. Just on a snap-to-snap basis, he's not an on-time, on-rhythm passer. The thing with Quinn Ewers, though, and the reason that I even have a late 6th round grade on him, is that there are flashes of just outstanding field command, poise, anticipation. Some of the throws that he makes into windows that haven't even started to open up yet, like before the receiver is, forget out of his break, even at the top of his route, are pretty incredible. And then despite not being a very good athlete, he has really impressive playmaking instincts when he's outside of the pocket or kind of maneuvering the pocket. So yeah, Ewers is not a player that I would value very highly. Wouldn't spend more than a late day 3 pick on him, because he's essentially got a resume of 3 games over 2 years. That's the only reason I'm even talking about him right now. If you really squint, you can see the upside. He just hasn't been able to put together a stretch of, high level consistent play. So I doubt that he's a starter in the NFL, but there is at least a chance. My quarterback 9 is Minnesota's Max Brosmer, and this is the guy kind of like Curtis Rourke. They're different prospects, but Max Brosmer is the player that I'm taking if I just need a solid backup quarterback on a cost-controlled contract. I think of anyone in this quarterback class, there's the greatest disparity between how much I enjoyed Max Brosmer's tape and what grade I had on him as a prospect, because I loved watching this dude's film, but I think that, it's hard for me to see him ever becoming a starter. He has a really unique blend of elite skills and then crippling deficiencies that would prevent him from seeing the field. So he's one of the best anticipatory throwers that I've ever seen at the college level. I mean, his feel for the intermediate passing game is elite. He dices up zone coverage with precision and timing. He's an absolute machine on 3rd and 4th downs. I remember a few months ago, I was listening to the NFL Stock Exchange podcast, and they said that Max Brosmer had, I think it was the highest PFF passing grade on 3rd and 4th downs, which absolutely checks out with the film. If you could draft this dude to be your all-time 3rd and 4th down quarterback, I mean, that would almost make sense. Imagine the Colts taking Max Brosmer and putting Anthony Richardson in for all of their deep play action shots, and then whenever they're going to throw within 10 yards, you just put Brosmer in. Obviously, I'm being tongue-in-cheek when I say that, but legitimately, if you combined Max Brosmer and Anthony Richardson's strengths, you would hear a key locking sound, and you would have created the perfect prototypical quarterback. His ball placement and accuracy on intermediate throws is the best in this class. My favorite accuracy statistic is Sports Info Solutions on target rate, which is just evaluating, is the throw accurate regardless of if it's dropped or anything like that. They also filter out throwaways. It, I think, consistently matches up with the tape most often. He had the highest on target rate in the FBS on 11 to 15 air yard passes, 84%. He's a very good touch thrower and also has a pretty big arm. He can push the ball downfield, I think, at a NFL caliber level. And then additionally, he was one of just 2 Power 4 quarterbacks that had at least 50 attempts from under center in 2024. But unfortunately with Max Brosmer, he's like a creative player where you spent all of your VC on those specific skills because the other aspects of his game are not playable at the NFL level. His deep accuracy was dreadful. Even though he has a pretty good arm, there is just no consistency with his ball placement on deep posts. On True Media, they have a stat for each play that's called incompletion reason. So drop, pass behind the receiver, miscommunication, whatever it is. Max Brosmer overthrew 8 out of 18 30-plus yard throws last year. So even though he's surgical in the short to intermediate game, not somebody that's going to be able to push the ball downfield consistently and, control the ball placement, at least complete the pass. And then the other thing is, all the stuff I said that makes him this great third down quarterback, that pretty much only applies to throwing from a clean pocket. When he's under pressure, he has pretty much no chance of creating a positive play. He's not a good athlete, so the escapability is very limited. He's pretty much a sitting duck when the pocket heats up. He also doesn't have very good recognition of blitzes and pressures, constantly getting blindsided by a free runner. And then he's also under 6'2", 6'0", and you really see that show up with his inability to see over pressure and see over his offensive line. And then the last thing that's worth mentioning with Brosmer is he has a really low release point and kind of a protracted windup. So he's getting rid of the ball at a low trajectory, and defensive tackles that are reading him have an extra split second to get their hand up, and he had 20 batted passes in the last 2 seasons. My quarterback 8 is Will Howard out of Ohio State, and there are so many things about Will Howard and the way that he plays the position that I really appreciate. Looking at his skill ratings, I have him rated as best in this class when it comes to touch, processing, and pocket presence. So that's a really good starting point for a pro-ready quarterback prospect. I just think this is a situation where the physical traits are enough of a limitation that it would really prevent him from being a starting quarterback in the NFL. But starting out with the positives, Ohio State is a relatively very pro-style passing game, and he consistently shows the ability to be a high-level, full-field reader, gets to backside digs, throws with anticipation. There's no one in this class that I think could operate an NFL passing game right out the gate at as high of a level as Will Howard. He's also, should have mentioned this first, but big quarterback, 6'4", 236, and a pretty good athlete, not a dual threat, but mobile enough. And then his pocket presence and feel for edge pressure is, I think, the best in this class. Does a great job of climbing the pocket with his eyes downfield. He's got a 12% career pressure to sack rate. A big issue, though, when it comes to the mental aspect of the game is his decision making. He threw 10 interceptions in each of the last 2 seasons. He's got a 3.9% career turnover-worthy play rate. He has a tendency to lock on to a predetermined read and just stare down that player. It resulted in 2 pick sixes, which you are probably thinking of right now, against Michigan and Penn State, but then also 2 interceptions against Michigan State and Texas. So even though I think he's really good at getting through his progressions, he needs to be much better at protecting the football. Now, this might be surprising if you watch his combine performance, which was absolutely brutal, but I think Will Howard is fairly accurate. I think firmly above average in terms of accuracy, especially from a clean pocket when he has time to operate his mechanics effectively. He's a player that you can tell is well coached when it comes to throwing mechanics, and when everything around him is solid and upright, he is generally pretty accurate. The issue, though, is that I don't think he's a natural thrower of the football. And I know that sounds like something the old scouts in Moneyball would say, but when he doesn't have structured footwork, any slight disturbance causes him to spray easy throws. So he does have some misses on tape. I think you see that more than anything when it comes to passes behind the line of scrimmage. That's my lowest accuracy rating that I have for him. If he's got a defender right in his face, he's leaning back on his heels, he can't just flip the ball to his check down accurately. He's consistently putting way too much heat on checkdowns and swing passes and just launching them 3 or 4 yards over the running back's head. And then he'll also occasionally sail some throws over the middle when his feet aren't set. But really the biggest issue that I have with Will Howard is the arm strength and the drive velocity. When he's trying to push the ball downfield, he's frequently forcing his receivers to come to a stop, work back to the football. Really past 40 yards, I would say, is where his true range kind of ends. But I can live with a quarterback that maybe doesn't have the best range. The real big issue with Will Howard is the ability to put zip on throws. On comebacks and deep outs, he just can't get enough zip on it to beat a crashing off coverage defender. That showed up with an interception against Iowa, and then also some pass breakups against Oregon and Nebraska. I'll put those on the screen. So it's unfortunate, but despite all the things things that I think he does at a high level, the arm strength limitations, I think will just really cap his ceiling in the NFL. So we've got a pretty significant jump here in my grades. I think quarterbacks 1 through 7 have at least a realistic chance of being a starting quarterback. And my QB 7 is going to be Dillon Gabriel out of Oregon. Whatever kind of buzzword you want to use, point guard, field general, that really fits Dillon Gabriel to a T. He's got 63 career starts, a ton of experience. He's incredibly undersized, 2nd percentile height, 7th percentile weight, and as you would expect, firmly below average arm talent, but his release is so quick and efficient, throws a very tight spiral. He's a very accurate quarterback, sharp mechanically. Going back to the on-target rate, led FBS quarterbacks with 81% on-target rate according to Sports Info Solutions. Overall, when it comes to ball placement, whether he's throwing from a structured platform or he's on the move, extremely precise. Now, the mental aspect of the game is kind of a mixed bag when it comes to Dillon Gabriel. I think it's definitely above average for an NFL draft prospect, but the standards are pretty high as far as what I'm looking for a player that has his kind of arm strength. I think he's a pretty sharp processor. He does a great job of synchronizing his eyes and his feet as he progresses through full field reads, and he is experienced and capable reading the entire field. What was kind of frustrating about Dillon Gabriel's tape, though, is there are examples of him going 1 to 2 to 3, getting to a backside dig, throwing it into an incredibly tight window where I'm like, oh, okay, this guy is pro ready, ready to start day one. But then there were also a lot of times where he was just inexplicably gun shy when it comes to wide open backside digs. I don't know if it's because he's short and he can't really see over the offensive line, but the anticipation and just, boldness when it comes to pulling the trigger on some of those throws really held me back from valuing him as an early day 3 prospect. And I also thought the Ohio State game was a really rough performance. He just looked overwhelmed and really small compared to all the NFL athletes on the field. My quarterback 6 is Kyle McCord out of Syracuse. Blew me away as far as my expectations based on what he looked like at Ohio State. I mean, just a completely different caliber of player from what I had seen in 2023. My high-end comp for Kyle McCord is Jay Cutler, and I probably should have said this at the beginning of the video, but the way that I do NFL draft comps is it's purely just play style. I try to give multiple comparisons if I can think of them. Really, my whole point with comparisons is if you're just skimming through my board, you can look at a comp and just get a rough feel for what somebody's play style is. If I compare a receiver to Marquez Valdes-Scantling, you're like, okay, deep threat with drop issues. So comps are play style, grades are how good of a prospect I think they are. But Kyle McCord's tape is volatile, erratic. There's a lot of good, a lot of bad. He led the FBS with 36 big-time throws last year, but also led the FBS with 24 turnover-worthy plays. For McCord, it's just going to be about reeling in the reckless decision-making and keeping as many of the high-end big-time throws as possible. His size is pretty good, 6'3", 218. 6'3" flat is 51st percentile for NFL quarterbacks. He has an NFL-caliber arm, I would say, and probably above-average accuracy. One of the best touch throwers in this class, does a great job of layering throws over hook defenders and pull runners over the middle of the field. Also exceptional ball placement to the deep sideline. He led FBS quarterbacks with 13 completions and 288 yards on back shoulder fades. Another player kind of similar to Will Howard, where I think he's a really good processor, but the decision making was pretty rough. I have him rated with the second best anticipation in this class, consistently releasing the ball before his receiver breaks, and that applies to throws over the middle of the field into zone coverage, but also outs and comebacks to the sideline. But he does have a bad habit of locking his eyes onto his target, leading defenders into passing lanes. He'll also misread his receiver's leverage and make dangerous throws within the 5 to 10 yard range. You see that on shallow crosses and outs. He doesn't have very good vision of safeties that are driving to the middle of the field or zone droppers from a double mug look. The 24 turnover-worthy plays and the 12 interceptions, they really came in all shapes and sizes on Kyle McCord's tape. My other big hang-up with Kyle McCord is sack evasion. His pressure to sack rate, 17%, not terrible at all. He's incredibly tough when it comes to taking a hit, standing in the pocket, delivering a strike down the field. He just doesn't have the speed and explosiveness to escape pressure, beat a defensive end to the corner, and then he makes it so much worse by running backwards when he gets interior pressure. He turns, a slight negative play into an absolute drive killer. Last year, he had the highest yards per sack in the FBS, 8.45 yards. So I think his most likely outcome is kind of a volatile backup, like a Jameis Winston, Ryan Fitzpatrick type of player, where he might be able to get hot and give you 1 or 2 games of high-level starter play, but eventually he's going to level out and just not be one of the 32 best quarterbacks. If he can improve his decision-making, though, I do think that he has starter upside. My 5th-ranked quarterback is somebody that a lot of people really like, and I just couldn't get all the way there, and that's Tyler Shough out of Louisville, who I've got as my 108th ranked player overall. So he's going to be 26 as a rookie. He's had multiple season-ending injuries. 2024 was the first healthy year that he was able to put together. He's got a really enticing blend of size, arm talent, and mobility. And I think that ultimately what I would say with Tyler Shough is his tape is like 20 to 25 great throws down the field and then mediocre quarterback play snap to snap. He has a big arm. He can push the ball 55, 60 yards down the field, really good deep accuracy when his footwork is clean. If you need someone to just throw a deep post shot off of play action, Tyler Shough is one of the best in this class. And then based on his build, I was expecting him to kind of be a statue and kind of like rigid thrower who can only make throws like from the pocket with structured footwork, but he's got a pretty elastic arm and really impressive mobility for his size. On outbreaking routes from like 8 to 15 yards, he had pretty good accuracy. And then he had the lowest pressure to sack rate in the Power 4, 8.9%, which is a much more nuanced conversation that I'll get into, but there are some good things in terms of his ability to avoid sacks. So that's kind of like what I would say Tyler Shough's strengths are. The rest of playing quarterback, I just have major questions about, and even though this isn't a great class at the top, I mean, I couldn't get to like quarterback 2, quarterback 3 with him. So I'll talk about the sack avoidance first, which I don't think is like his biggest weakness, but I don't know if I've ever seen a quarterback who navigates pressure the way that he does. He's sack averse almost to a fault. He had 24 throwaways last year, which was the most in the FBS. He seems like he would rather take an intentional grounding than a sack. There were multiple really bad intentional groundings, and there's some good pocket movement, but a lot of his sack avoidance is just kind of, he's got his eyes downfield. The minute that he feels pressure, without even checking to see if his target is open, he is just like launching the ball away, to a check down or out of bounds. It's really weird. Like there were a couple plays where he threw it right to a defender where he thought his check down was going to be open. I don't know if I've ever said this about a quarterback prospect, but I wish Tyler Shough was more content to just take a sack and move on to the next play. Part of that, I think, comes down to his injury history. He seems almost afraid of contact and getting hit, which, like, it's not lost to me the irony of me, who has like never played football at a high level, questioning somebody's toughness, which like I always feel weird about that. But he really seems to have an issue with taking a hit. You also see that show up with his footwork. He has a really bad habit of unnecessarily drifting and fading away, even when he has plenty of room to step into the throw. And even though his deep accuracy was generally pretty good, the majority of his misses were due to that just unnecessary, terrible footwork. But my biggest issues with Tyler Shough, and something that I feel like I don't see enough people mention this with him, is accuracy and processing. I think both of those are far below standard for a starting NFL quarterback. He does not have good ball placement, especially within 5 yards, misses a lot of throws behind the line of scrimmage. He's imprecise on slants and quick in breakers forces his receiver to reach backwards or hits them out of stride. And then he just doesn't have anywhere near the rhythm, timing, and command of the field to operate an intermediate passing game and throw with anticipation. He pretty much stares at his first read until the pass rush closes in and then launches the ball to his check down at the last second. When he was able to get to his second or third read, a lot of times his receivers were forced to be at a complete standstill just waiting for the ball. And there were a lot of plays on tape where Louisville's receivers were visibly frustrated with his inability to see the field. I think the fact that he's 26 years old isn't immediately disqualifying, especially with a quarterback prospect and especially with a player that isn't like, he's not an older prospect because he couldn't lock down a starting job. Like, he's got a legitimate reason for why he's such a late bloomer. But to be a 26-year-old prospect that needs this much work with accuracy and processing and also has kind of a weird aversion to contact, I just despite all of the high-end throws on the tape, I can't really justify Tyler Shough with anything higher than an early day 3 grade. My 4th ranked quarterback is Jackson Dart out of Ole Miss. I'm definitely lower on him than some people. Like, I've seen him as quarterback 1 on some people's boards. I'm starting to see him occasionally in first-round mocks, which is just kind of mind-blowing to me. I think he's a solid prospect. There's a lot to like with Jackson Dart, but to me, he is a purely developmental quarterback that needs a redshirt year and is just a complete unknown in several key areas of playing quarterback in the NFL. But I'll start with the good. I think he's one of the most accurate quarterbacks in this class. He's just a natural thrower of the football. He's got really good ball placement from unbalanced platforms. He can mix up his arm angles. Against Georgia and LSU this year, his ball placement was a little bit off, so that's really the only knock that I have for him in that area of his game. I think his arm is pretty good. I would describe it as NFL caliber. I don't think it's a weapon or anything, but it would surprise me if, Jackson Dart doesn't work out and like we're talking about him 4 years later and the main reason is that, he couldn't make the necessary throws. He's also a good athlete, almost 2,000 rushing yards since transferring to Ole Miss. They use him as a designed runner, but he's also a pretty sudden athlete when it comes to dodging pass rushers, bolting away from traffic. I was really impressed with his toughness and his ability to deliver a tough throw while he's taking a hit. And I also think his touch is very good. I have him rated as the 3rd best touch thrower in this class. But there are 2 major areas of concern that I have with Jackson Dart, and that's processing and pocket presence. So Ole Miss's offense is one of the most gimmicky from a passing game standpoint as far as projecting to the NFL. I think Lane Kiffin is a great play caller and offensive mind, really effective for winning games in the SEC, but there's very little on Jackson Dart's tape that translates to the NFL from a mental processing standpoint. He's pretty much either throwing like vertical one-on-one isolated matchups or wide open space over the middle of the field that Lane Kiffin has schemed open. He's rarely asked to see the entire field, work to the backside of a concept. I thought there were a couple examples of that later in the season, but overall just not enough on his tape for me to feel confident in him. A lot of Ole Miss's passing game is designed to limit how many times Jackson Dart has to account for multiple defenders at once. And even in an offense where the answers were mostly schemed up for him, I thought he was still slow to process and, even just like pull the trigger on his first read. I think it's worth making the comparison between Jackson Dart and Hendon Hooker from a few years ago. Hendon Hooker went in the 3rd round and he came from a similarly gimmicky offensive scheme, but within that scheme, he was at least a surgical on-the-money processor. They weren't asking him to do much more than, read a cornerback's leverage or just, stare at one defender, and if he breaks on this route, you throw the other one. Like, what he was asked to do wasn't that difficult, but he at least executed it at a high level. Jackson Dart wasn't asked to do a whole lot mentally, but he even, struggled to be on time with some pretty simple concepts. So I don't know if he's capable of operating an NFL passing game, but I do know that you're going to be starting from square one, getting him up to speed. Not even just, forget learning the playbook, learning specific concepts, learning how to operate under center, learning the cadence, all that stuff. Everyone's going to have to deal with that, but even just the feel for spacing and like tight windows, where you can fit a dig route in between two hook defenders. He's just never really had to make those throws. I mean, that's a huge part of playing quarterback in the NFL, and he's starting from square one there. I also thought his pocket presence and how he deals with pressure was very concerning. He consistently drops his eyes when the pocket heats up. There are very few examples of him climbing the pocket and keeping his eyes downfield. When he sees pressure, he's either scrambling, which sometimes results in explosive plays, or he's taking a sack. So a lot of evaluating NFL draft prospects comes down to checking boxes, and Jackson Dart has two major boxes that are unchecked. If he can develop in those areas, I think he has upside to be a quality NFL starter, but I also don't see, top 5 quarterback upside. So he's a project, but I don't think the payoff is enough for me to value him super highly in the draft. Next up, we've got Jalen Milroe, who comes in as my quarterback 3. And from the summer to now, I've had essentially every possible opinion on Jalen Milroe. I ended up grading him as actually a top 50 prospect, and I am a lot more bullish on Jalen Milroe than a lot of people in draft media. I haven't sold all of my Jalen Milroe stock at this point, but I want to just walk you through the last 2 years of Jalen Milroe, and I think you'll understand what makes him such a difficult evaluation, but why there still is a lot of reason to be optimistic. So when it comes to the physical traits, he's got a rocket arm. I mean, the definition of the ball exploding off of your hand. And I would say that he's the best running quarterback prospect of all time. The other player I would consider is Lamar Jackson, who I think in his prime athletically was maybe more elusive than Jalen Milroe. But Milroe's speed, his immediate acceleration, I think is a step above Lamar. And Milroe isn't scrawny or skinny. Like, he's built like a running back, short, compact, sturdy build. He can lower his shoulder and drive through contact. So in terms of the athletic traits and natural skills, we're talking about high-end upside here. And then he's also, by all accounts, just an A+ character, leadership, like everything that I hear about him, as far as how he is with guys in the locker room, his work ethic, drive to get better, that's all been just glowing reviews. And I'll be honest, like that definitely makes me a little bit more confident in him as a prospect and the chance that he could reach his upside. So the starting point from a natural talent perspective and the makeup of his character is all great, very enticing for an NFL draft prospect. I watched, I think, the first 3 quarters of his season in 2023 when I thought he might enter that draft. Realized eventually that he wasn't going to declare because he wasn't ready, but I've got about like 1.75 years of tape that I've been exposed to for Jalen Milroe. Based on last year's tape, his processing, his ability to work the middle of the field, and his pocket presence were at unplayable levels for an NFL draft prospect. I saw the natural talent, but those things had to improve for me to take him seriously as a prospect. And as I'll get into, I think they really did improve this year. So when we go through the 2024 season, I'm actually going to put a screenshot of his weekly PFF like grading profile up on the screen. Not that PFF grades factor into my evaluation at all, but it's a good just like one number to kind of give you a sense for how he played in that game. And even just looking at the colors, like you can see the volatility of the 2024 season. So it starts out with Western Kentucky and USF, lower level of competition games that I don't really value that highly, but played pretty well in those. Wisconsin, Georgia, and Vanderbilt is by far the best 3-game stretch of his career as a passer. Based on weeks 3 to 6, he looked like quarterback 1 in this class and a future Pro Bowl player. I know Trevor Sikkema had him, like, after the Georgia game, put him at 8th player overall, which I think based on that tape was justified. I watched those games and I was sold on Jalen Milroe as quarterback 1. He had shown improvement throwing over the middle of the field, improved pocket presence, and just like the athletic traits and arm talent was all A to A+. Week 7 to 8, though, the Jalen Milroe hype comes to a screeching halt. I think this was the worst 2-game stretch that I've ever seen from him. His accuracy was terrible. For those 2 games, according to Sports Info Solution, he had a 58% on target rate, which extrapolated over the whole season would be the worst in college football. he couldn't hit anything. It especially was terrible in the Tennessee game. I mean, he lost them that game. Tennessee was trying to give Alabama the game, and there was a drive where he just inexcusable sailing throws. And then there were also turnover issues. 4 interceptions. Overall was just the worst quarterback play of his career, and especially compared to how good he played in the first 5 games, I thought he had to have been injured. Like, if he had played a little bit better, I would think that maybe he was just regressing, but the stark difference in how he looked, I'm like, okay, this guy's got to have an injury or something, because there's no way you see just such a steep drop off. And then weeks 9 and 11, he kind of stabilized and looked more like a fun developmental dual threat quarterback that would go late first round. They leaned heavily on his rushing ability. The LSU game especially, he had 185 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. Weeks 13 and 14, Oklahoma and Auburn, he showed a little bit of everything. Very volatile quarterback play, 3 rushing touchdowns, 3 fumbles, 2 pick sixes, 5 big time throws. And then he caps off the year with just an awful performance against Michigan in the bowl game. So at some point in the 2024 season, for some stretch of 2 or 3 games, he looked like every potential version of himself that's ever existed in reality or in theory. If you're just watching a few games of these prospects, which is what most people have time to do, be very conscious of the fact that your game selection with Jalen Milroe is going to determine what you think of him as a prospect. But evaluating his tape as a whole, let's kind of break him down more in general terms as a prospect. So I mentioned his issues with processing and specifically his inability to see the middle of the field from 2023. I thought there was significant improvement in that area. He went from completely incapable to a work in progress. There's still a ton of room for improvement when it comes to processing coverages, progressing to his second or third read on time, but 8 to 10 examples of him on rhythm, working to a backside dig, that's like 8 to 10 more than he showed last year. His pressure to sack rate was almost 32% in 2023. He cut that down to 18.5% this year. Still, again, room to improve, but way less examples of him taking bad sacks. I think he did a much better job of using his athleticism to evade pressure. So the 2 biggest areas of improvement from last year, he took a significant step forward. Unfortunately, though, I thought he took a step back when it comes to accuracy. I actually didn't have major concerns with Jalen Milroe's accuracy from his 2023 tape. And his deep accuracy was actually really good. Like, he was one of the more consistent deep throwers in this class, but his deep accuracy regressed this year, and across the board, the ball placement is pretty inconsistent. His biggest issue, though, is the 15 to 20, 25 yard range to the sideline. So that's hole shots, deep outs, and comebacks. He has no issue generating enough velocity to get it there on time, but so many uncatchable passes on those timing outbreaking routes. Even though he has a really good arm in terms of strength and velocity, he doesn't have a very flexible release. He's a 1-speed, 1-level passer. He doesn't have a loose arm to get rid of the ball on command from an awkward angle, and he's also not a great touch thrower. His decision making as far as avoiding turnovers, protecting the football, is not as bad as some other quarterbacks in this class. I think some people kind of overstate how reckless he is as a decision maker. Like, I think he's much better in that area than Will Howard, Kyle McCord, but there were a couple plays where he wouldn't see a hook defender who was widening out to the flat or the curl flat, and he would get undercut on a hitch route. That resulted in a pick 6 against Oklahoma and an interception against Michigan. So Milroe is definitely a project. I wouldn't bang the table that he's going to be a good player in the NFL, but I probably would bang the table for just taking a bet on him in the second or third round. Most people at this point in the process have Jackson Dart or Tyler Shuck as their quarterback 3, but watching all these guys tape, I'm just a lot more excited about Jalen Milroe's upside. And again, like I said, the character reviews that I've gotten for Milroe give me a little bit more confidence that he's going to develop and reach or approach his upside. My second ranked quarterback and 34th ranked player overall is Shedeur Sanders out of Colorado. And the funny thing with Shedeur Sanders is that he's this controversial hot button prospect, but if he wasn't Deion Sanders' son, he's like one of the most boring prospects that I've ever evaluated. And I don't even say that as an explicitly negative or positive thing. Like, there are strengths to his game that make him, not that interesting to talk about. There are weaknesses that make him not that interesting to talk about. He has average size, average physical traits, average arm talent. He's very accurate, takes a lot of bad sacks. I think he's a really smart and tough player. I think the most likely outcome for Shedeur Sanders' career is that he's kind of a mid-level starter for a few years and then becomes one of the better backups in the league. So going through every aspect of Shedeur Sanders' game, his arm talent, I think, is definitely a weakness. I would say it's a step above being a deal breaker compared to Will Howard, for example, where to me, the lack of arm talent just makes me not view him as a potential starter. I think Shedeur Sanders, if he really refines every other aspect of his game, he has a good enough arm to survive in the NFL. His arm strength, I would actually say, is borderline not even a weakness. You can probably tell from going through a lot of these players, I value velocity a lot more than range. Just being able to throw the ball really far is kind of, there's a point of diminishing returns for me. But the biggest issue that I had with Shedeur's arm on tape was the lack of drive velocity and his inability to push the ball into tight windows. His mediocre arm talent, I think, also shows up when he's on the move. There are a lot of times where he just has to pass up an open receiver downfield when he's out of the pocket, where like Cam Ward, for example, he's ripping that throw every time. Shedeur Sanders will see players, 30 yards downfield running to the sideline. He's rolling out to his left. He might even kind of start to pull the trigger and he's just I can't make that throw. So his lack of arm talent, I think, does take some explosive plays just kind of off the table for him. His accuracy, though, I thought was exceptional. Deep passes within his range, within 40 to 45 yards, automatic on deep throws, really good touch. I have him rated with the second best deep accuracy in this class, but really every level of the field. I mean, there are a couple misses on his tape, like he sailed a throw that resulted in an interception against Kansas State, but just pinpoint accuracy across the board, I think. His processing actually is kind of an interesting conversation. So Colorado ran a spread offense that I would say is less collegey than the Ole Misses and Tennessees, but not really pro style either. He did target the intermediate middle of the field pretty frequently. And I think for the most part, he was effective making those throws, making those decisions. But the problem is that he's not an anticipatory thrower. He needs to see receivers come open out of their breaks to pull the trigger. And I think that, he doesn't have the velocity to afford to wait for those routes to come open. So for him to be an effective intermediate passer in the NFL, he's either got to magically develop a better arm or start throwing with anticipation. One of those things has to give. He's a very good decision maker, a 1.5% turnover-worthy play rate since 2023. Part of that is inflated by Colorado's offense. 19.7% of his pass attempts in 2024 were screens, which is the most in this class, but still, there was the pick six against Nebraska, which is a terrible decision, but overall, this is somebody that does a great job of protecting the football. My biggest concern with Shedeur Sanders, though, by far, is his pocket presence, which I think is abysmal. Other than Matthew Downing from Elon, I have him rated with the worst pocket presence in this class of 14, which is kind of like an unplayable red flag for an NFL draft prospect. He plays like he's as athletic as his dad, but I think he's a below average athlete by NFL standards. And so he has this kind of, gunslinger, like Caleb Williams out of structure play style in response to pressure. But I mean, he can't outrun Big 12 and Pac 12 defensive ends. He holds the ball way too long. He takes really deep drops into the pocket. Terrible offensive line at Colorado. I'm not denying that, but he did them no favors. He was taking some really deep drops where like Lane Johnson isn't blocking a speed rusher based on the angle that he's giving them. PFF charts the percentage of pressures that are the quarterback's responsibility, and Shedeur Sanders had the fourth highest in the FBS. So even though he had a really bad offensive line, that I think was much worse in 2023. It was a team effort, him taking 90 sacks over the last 2 years. So I think the outcome of Shedeur Sanders' career is really going to hinge on his pocket presence. If he can develop that, and it turns out that was more of him developing bad habits because Colorado's offensive line was so bad. They had no running game, so he felt like, moving the ball through the air was their only way of moving the ball, and that caused him to keep his eyes downfield and hold the ball for too long. If it turns out that was more just situation related and that's something he can improve, then I think he's got a good chance of being a mid-level starter, like somebody you would rank 15 to 25 among NFL starting quarterbacks. If he doesn't develop his pocket presence, I think he's got a good chance of ending up as kind of a backup level quarterback because he doesn't have the physical traits to offset that issue. And my number one quarterback, to no one's surprise, is Cam Ward out of Miami. Cam Ward's a player that I generally like. There's just a couple hangups that I have with his tape that I think give him a somewhat high bust rate or bust factor, but he took a major step forward this year, and I thought that the last 2 games of his season, those are the best games that I've ever seen him play. And I watched every game of 2024. I watched 5 games from 2023. Week 14 against Syracuse, and then I guess the first half of the bowl game against Iowa State. That's as good as he's ever looked. And how you finish the season is like, that does matter to me. And so I actually slightly increased my grade on him after watching the last 2 games of his tape. So yet another player that's just under 6'2". I don't know what it is with this class, but 6 of my top 12 quarterbacks are from like 6'1.5" to 1/8 of an inch over 6'2". I would say he's a B- athlete by NFL standards. Not somebody that is going to be a major feature in your running game, but he can get it done with his legs when he's actually trying to run and not doing the nonchalant shit. His arm is very good. When it comes to pure arm strength and range, I think it's a clear tier below elite, but like I said, it's a point of diminishing returns there. He can push the ball downfield. If you watch the California game especially, there's a couple throws, I think both of them ended up as incompletions, where you're like, okay, this guy can sling it. The other aspects of his arm talent, though, are close to elite. His drive velocity and especially his release quickness are outstanding. I was really impressed with his ability to generate sudden velocity and torque when he's rolling out, especially to his left. He can just flip his hips and fire a pass 30 yards downfield on a moment's notice. He has a very flexible release as well. Not as dynamic as Caleb Williams last year, who was one of the best I've ever seen as far as having so many different arm angles, but the ball handling, the arm elasticity with Cam Ward is exceptional. His play style, I think in some ways is not that translatable to the NFL game, but I think he has the capability to operate a pro style offense. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So a lot of his highlight plays are these out of structure, out of the pocket, off platform, 12 seconds after the snap, fadeaway throws. That's the kind of thing for a quarterback prospect where I want to see that you have the creativity and the ability to do that. But at a certain point, I'm just not that impressed by out of structure playmaking, and I think it's a pretty overrated trait for quarterbacks. Just like Zach Wilson's tape at BYU, there's a lot of stuff on Cam Ward's tape that just doesn't move me that much from an NFL draft projection standpoint. If he takes the snap, sits in the pocket for 5 seconds, doesn't get any pressure, bails out from a clean pocket, rolls out to his left, hovers out in the alley for like 7 more seconds before a pass rusher even gets close to him, and then makes a great throw into the back of the end zone. That's a really, good play that's going to go viral on Twitter. But that will never happen in the NFL. Like, the pass rush closes in way too quickly. You're hardly ever going to have that much time in the pocket. I said the same thing with Caleb Williams. It applies to Cam Ward. There's a lot of stuff on his tape that I think a lot of other people really value that, once I've seen it once or twice and I know you can create a little bit, I'm just not as enamored with it. But when he does operate from within the pocket, I was really impressed with his processing ability, his anticipation, his ability to operate a passing game on time and in rhythm. I feel like with Cam Ward, there's a lot of stuff that gets other people really excited that I'm kind of, I can take it or leave it. And there's a lot of stuff that people don't mention enough with him that really entices me as far as projecting him to the NFL. He showed the ability to make full field reads from the pocket, progress to backside digs. He throws with much better anticipation than any of the other top quarterbacks, Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, Tyler Shough. I would take Cam Ward's anticipation over them in a heartbeat. There's still room to improve there. I think there are occasions where he's a bit too hesitant and, second guesses himself, pulling the trigger on his second or third read. He'll have to speed that up to clear NFL windows for sure. But overall, his in structure in the pocket tape, I thought was really impressive and a major improvement from last year. The other processing thing that I will note with Cam Ward is I think he really needs to improve his recognition ID of safety rotation. There were a lot of times that, the defense started out in too high, rotated to cover 3. He's got a wide open seam route on the weak side of the coverage, and he just didn't ID the coverage, so he didn't see that, missed some big play opportunities there. He's kind of rough around the edges, but I think there's a lot to be excited about. The other mental aspect that I have a lot more concerns with is decision making and protecting the football. So he only threw 7 interceptions, but he did have 18 turnover worthy plays. And I would group his interceptions and interceptable passes into 2 categories. One of them I can live with, one of them just has to improve. He's going to make some bad decisions and put the ball in danger just based on his play style. As an out of structure gunslinger type, there's going to be times where he tries to fit the ball into a window that is closing in too fast, or it's late in the play, he doesn't see a defender driving on a route. Because he's offsetting those occasional bad decisions with 3x, 4x as many big time throws down the field, I'm fine if he throws 1 interception every 2 weeks just because he bites off more than he can chew. But he has some interceptions where he's throwing across his body over the middle of the field that are just completely inexcusable. I don't know if that's something that you can coach out of him. I hope it is, but you can't do that and hold down a starting job in the NFL for very long. Heading into his tape, I was expecting that decision making would be the biggest red flag that I had for Cam Ward, but it actually ended up being his accuracy, which is the reason that I'm lower on him than some. He's my 18th ranked player overall, and I do factor in positional value with my grades. So I'm going to value these kind of fringe first round quarterback prospects a lot higher than most people. I'm going to have higher grades on the Will Levises and the Bo Nixes and the JJ McCarthys and that tier of quarterback. But yeah, I think that Cam Ward's inaccuracy is something that kind of gets under discussed, and it's by far the biggest concern that I have with his game. He's very accurate throwing to the intermediate sideline, so outs and comebacks. I thought that improved significantly down the stretch and became a true strength of his game. But his deep accuracy was pretty bad in my opinion. There were a lot of big plays that were left on the field just because he overthrew his target. Also a lot of plays where he's hitting his receiver out of stride over the deep middle of the field, so seams and deep digs and stuff like that. If the reckless decision making was his only issue as a prospect, I'd be a lot higher on him. But combining that with also having accuracy issues, that is going to significantly lower his grade for me. The last thing to discuss is pocket presence. I thought it was below average, not at Shedeur Sanders levels or anything. He has really good natural ability to escape sacks. He's got that short area explosiveness. There are some examples of really nice anticipation of late pressure, dodging someone in a phone booth, stepping up in the pocket. I still thought there were too many plays where he dropped his eyes when he got pressured and wasn't able to see the middle of the field over the pass rush. His blitz recognition on third down is pretty spotty, and then there are some just egregiously bad sacks that he takes when he's hunting for a big play. The game that they lost to Georgia Tech in week 11 is a perfect example of that. It's fourth quarter, potential game-winning drive. It's only second down. There's a backside dig that comes open, but he can't see it over the defensive line. He's got an outlet to the right to the flat where he could hit his check down, but he decides to extend, look for a big play, ends up taking a strip sack that ends the game. So yeah, I like Cam Ward. I don't love him as a draft prospect. He's definitely not somebody that I would plant my flag on not being good because I see the upside and I see that there's a couple things that he could fix and end up as a really good quarterback. But a lot of coming up with these grades is balancing the risk versus the reward. And if he doesn't fix those critical issues, he's somebody that could be out of the league, you know, by the end of his rookie contract. For the Titans specifically, if they can't trade down, my first pick would still be Abdul Carter if I was making the decision, but taking Cam Ward, that's not a decision that I would hate at all or really like disapprove of. There have been a lot more unpolished quarterbacks than Cam Ward that have put everything together and become franchise guys. So it's within the realistic range of outcomes for sure. That's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter if you don't already. I'll put the link to that in the description. Also link to my draft guide, which I personally think is one of the 2 best draft guides available. Put a ton of work into it, and I think it's a great resource if you're interested in learning about these prospects.